Most founders walk into investor meetings thinking confidence means talking more. Wrong. I've been pitched more times than I can remember, honestly, and I work with founders on a daily basis. I sit on the investor jury of VentureKick in Zurich. I've been on both sides of the table as an operator and as an investor, from starting my career as a PE professional, doing restructurings as the CEO, and now as I'm building my investment firm. Here's what I've learned. The founders who command the room aren't the ones talking the most. They're usually the ones who've mastered 4 specific moments that happen in every single meeting. Get this wrong and you waste precious runway, time, energy, and chasing investors who were never going to say yes. Get it right and you shift the entire dynamic from convince me to tell me more. Today, I'm breaking down the exact framework I've seen across hundreds of meetings. The pre-meeting positioning that changes everything. The opening 60 seconds that set the tone. How to handle the inevitable pushback, and the close that actually moves deals forward. Let's make this concrete. Here's how we're breaking this down. 4 critical moments that determine every VC or investor meeting. Moment 1, the pre-meeting frame. Why most investors lose before they even walk in, and how to position yourself before the meeting starts. Moment 2, the opening 60 seconds. What investors are actually evaluating in the first minute or so. Nice to meet you wastes your most valuable time. Moment 3, the pushback response. The exact pattern that separates founders who fold from founders who close. When VCs start poking holes, that's when this counts. Moment 4, the meeting close, how to end without being pushy, and why we'll follow up just kills the momentum. By the end, you'll know exactly how to control these 4 moments, and you'll understand why most founders and CEOs who think they're just need to do more meetings are actually repeating the same mistakes over and over. The meeting already starts way before you walk into the room. Most founders don't realize this. They think the pitch begins when they open the deck. By then, you've already lost half the battle, or at least missed a massive opportunity. Here's what's happening before you arrive. The VC investor has your deck. They're probably glancing at it for 90 seconds, if you're lucky. Maybe 2 minutes, but that's it. They've looked at your website, maybe. They've possibly checked your LinkedIn. Here's the thing. They've already formed an initial hypothesis about you. The question isn't whether they have an opinion. They do, but the question is whether that opinion is this could be interesting or let's get this over with. I learned this from one of my mentors who is an absolute veteran in the space. The founders who had done the pre-work always had an advantage, not because their companies were better, because they controlled the narrative before stepping on stage. So here's what commanding the room actually looks like 72 hours out. First, you send out a targeted 1-pager. Not your pitch deck, 1 page. Problem, solution, question, and ask. The email should be 3 sentences. Looking forward to meeting you on Tuesday. Attached is a 1-pager so you can dive deeper into X. Happy to adjust the agenda if there are areas you'd like to focus on. And that last sentence is key. You're positioning yourself as someone who values their time. You're professional, you're prepared, and you're willing to make alterations. Second, you check their recent investments. Not all of them, just the last couple ones. Look for patterns. Are they backing companies at your stage, in your category? If yes, then you have ammunition. If no, you need to understand why they took the meeting. Last month, I was meeting with a deep tech founder in Zurich, and before the meeting, they sent us a 1-pager that highlighted exactly why his company aligns with our personal backgrounds and how we could help him. He did some basic LinkedIn research and just showed us he had done the homework. And when we sat down, I'd already read the 1-pager, and the meeting wasn't convince me I should care. It was more like help me understand the technical risk and dive deeper. And that's the difference. Here's what this means for you. Don't just prepare your pitch, prepare the context. 1-pager, 70 hours ahead. 3 sentences maximum in the email, research the last couple investments, and show up knowing why you're in the room. Now here's where this gets interesting. You're in the room, first 60 seconds. This is where most founders either build momentum or create friction that they'll end up fighting against the next 45 minutes. So here's what's actually happening in that first minute. The investor is calibrating, not just what you say, how you say it, your energy, your clarity, whether you waste time or create immediate value. Most founders open with pleasantries. Thanks for taking the time. Great to meet you. Should I start with the deck? All fine, all safe, all forgettable. The founders who command the room do something different. They open with a frame. A frame is a single sentence or something spectacular that positions the entire conversation. It tells the investor what lens to use. It gives them context for everything that follows. Here's an example. I once saw a pitch from a team that started with playing the violin. I still remember that pitch, even though I forgot all other pitches that I heard that day. Or consider opening with a statement like this. You've invested in company X and company Y. We're building the infrastructure layer that sits underneath both of them. Notice what these frames do. They don't ask for permission. They don't apologize. They immediately position you as someone who understands the game. You're not here to educate them about the problem. You're here to show them why you're the one to solve this particular problem. I watched a medtech founder do this brilliantly in Abu Dhabi last year. She walked in, sat down and said, "You've seen 4 diagnostic companies in the last month. We're solving the adoption problem," I think it was. And the investor's entire posture changed. She'd done her research. She knew what she'd been looking at. She wasn't another diagnostic pitch. She was positioning herself as the category winner in a specific dimension. The meeting became a whole conversation about distribution strategy and not a debate about whether diagnostics matter. And sitting in on discussions like this is really why I get up in the morning. It was so cool. Now, the frame only works if it's true. If you say we're solving the unit economics problem and your unit economics are rubbish, you just kill your credibility. The frame isn't marketing, it's strategic positioning based on your actual competitive advantage. Here's the other thing about the opening 60 seconds. Body language matters more than founders think. I'm not talking about power poses, crossing your arms versus not, and any of that nonsense. I'm talking about whether you look like you belong in that room. Sit down without asking where. Make eye contact. Don't fidget with your laptop. These things are very important. The person who commands the room looks comfortable. Here's what this means for you. Write your frame before the meeting. One sentence that positions your company against the market or against the recent investments that you know have happened in the room. And practice it. Then open with that the first 60 seconds of the meeting. Skip the thank yous, skip asking if they've had a chance to look at the deck, frame the conversation, control the narrative from the start. But that's only half the story. The pushback always comes. If you're not getting pushback, the investor isn't engaged. The question isn't whether you'll face tough questions, it's how you respond when you do. Here's what most founders do wrong. They get defensive or they over-explain, become super wordy. Worst of all, they try to convince the investor is wrong and should not be concerned. That's a bad move. I've spent years in private equity and restructuring. I've been in rooms where the entire job was to identify what's broken and push on it. And when someone challenges you, they're not trying to kill your deal. They're trying to understand if you've thought it through. The founders who command the room have a pattern. 3 steps every single time. Step 1, acknowledge without agreeing. You can say something like, "That's a fair question. I understand why that looks like a risk," or "We've thought about that extensively." You're not admitting you're right, you're just showing you respect the question. Then step 2, you reframe the concern. This is critical. You don't just argue against their point. You show them why it's actually a feature and not a bug, or why it's a solved problem already. Step 3, you redirect to your strength. You bring the conversation back to what you're actually good at, not in a dismissive way. Let me make this concrete. Let me adapt a SaaS example for you. Your customer acquisition cost is too high for this to scale. The correct response is for the founder to pause. That's a fair concern. Our CAC is higher than traditional SaaS in the first cohort. Here's why that is actually strategic. We're acquiring customers who have a 3-year payback, not a 1-year payback. Our LTV to CAC ratio therefore is 5-to-1, not 3-to-1. We're optimizing for long-term value, not short-term volume. The real question is whether we can maintain that LTV as we scale, and here's the data showing we can. You need to back it up if you say something like that. But notice what he did. Acknowledge, reframe, redirect. He didn't argue with the concern. He showed why the concern was based on the wrong comparison, and then he redirected to the actual risk that mattered. But here's the thing about pushback. Investors who push the hardest are often the ones who are most interested. They're stress testing you. They're seeing if you crack under pressure. Because if you can't handle a tough question in a conference room, you're not going to handle a tough board meeting when it goes sideways. The founders who fold in meetings also fold when building companies. The founders who stay composed and redirect the conversation are the ones who'll navigate actual crises and then also be good at sales. One more point on this. Never ever say, we haven't thought about that yet, or we'll look into that. That's death. If you haven't thought about it, you shouldn't be raising capital at all. The right answer is always some version of, here's how we're thinking about that, followed by your actual thinking. So map out the 5 most likely objections before every meeting, and after a few meetings, you should have a list of things that people actually ask you, pushback you get, and write out the 3-step response like we spoke about: acknowledge, reframe, redirect. Then you go into your next meeting and you test your responses and you just see what sticks. Practice makes perfect. So don't worry if you blow it the first few times. You just get pushback all the time and then iterate. This leads to the final moment that most founders completely miss. The meeting is winding down. You're at 45 minutes, maybe 50. This is where most founders hand back all the power they've built. They say, thanks so much for your time, and wait to be dismissed like a job interview. Don't be that guy. The close is where deals either move forward or die slowly. Not because the investor says no, but because nothing happens. We'll follow up, and 3 weeks later, you're still wondering where you stand. Here's what commanding the room looks like at the close. You create the next concrete step before you leave. I learned this working in private equity. Every meeting had to end with a specific next action. A specific action with a specific timeline and someone in charge of that. So here's the pattern. 3 questions in order. Question 1, based on what we discussed, what's your level of interest? Is this something you would want to explore further? Direct, clear, and forces them to give you signal. Question 2, would you need to move this to the next stage? Notice what you're doing. You're not asking if they're interested in some vague future way. You're asking what's between here and the next stage. You're assuming that there will be a next stage if you provide what they need. Question 3, would it make sense to schedule a follow-up for next week, or would you prefer to review the materials first and then reconnect? You're giving them options, but both options assume a forward momentum. You're not leaving it open-ended. Here's what most founders get wrong about the close. They think being pushy means being aggressive. It doesn't. Being pushy means not respecting their process. Creating a concrete next step is respecting their process. You're making it easy for them to say yes. The other mistake is leaving without understanding their timeline. You need to know, is this a 2-week process or a 2-month process? If they're investing from an active fund, decision move faster. But if they're syndicating a deal or they need LP approval, that usually takes longer. Just ask. Here's what this means for you. Don't leave any meeting without a concrete next step. Either a follow-up meeting scheduled or specific materials they need with a deadline for when you'll send them, or a clear timeline for when they'll have an answer. And if they're vague, push gently. I want to be respectful of your process to help me plan what's a realistic timeline for getting to a decision. You're not being pushy, you're being professional. There's a difference. Now let's bring this all together. If you're raising capital, these 4 moments will change how investors see you. Pre-meeting frame, opening 60 seconds, pushback response, meeting close. Control these and you shift from convincing to commanding. Now, commanding the meeting is one thing, but how do you actually get the confidence to walk into a meeting and present the idea you've been working on? What most people get backwards is that you need this superpower called confidence in order to do things. What confidence actually looks like and how you acquire it, I will tell you in this video on the screen. Watch this next.